Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone. We'll just give another minute to let everyone into the room, and then we'll start today's webinar. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Brendan Cahill. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of International Humanitarian Affairs. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our latest webinar, this one by Dr. Arancha Garcia Del Soto on collective actions in women who have experienced war. This is the latest in a number of webinars that we've held on everything from child trauma to issues in the Caribbean. The Institute was founded in 2001 at Fordham University and reports directly to its provost. We run undergraduate programs, graduate programs, training programs. We have 5 areas of research, our own publications, a new podcast called Humanitarian Fault Lines, and I urge you all to subscribe to that as well, and conferences and webinars. We're thrilled to have Arancha Garcia Del Soto back with us. Arancha Garcia was the Helen Hamlin Senior Fellow here at the Institute years ago and is an old friend. She's a Spanish psychologist and sociologist working on human rights since 1993, when she started accompanying the refugee groups in the Balkans, case by case, collectively, or through the people in those organizations. She has worked all over the world, in the Balkans, Colombia, West Africa, Sri Lanka, etc. In the early 2000s, she worked, as I mentioned, both here at the Institute and was working at University of Pennsylvania as well. She then moved back to Spain and currently collaborates with different organizations, from community-based, that is families of the missing or women in exile, to the International Criminal Court, the Truth Commission, and the Special Jurisdiction in Colombia, as well as the EU human rights sections. Her latest publication is the book, Les Candases, La Mar devuelve la verdad, that is, the sea returns the truth, about 8 women thrown off of cliffs in Asturias in June 1938 during the repression that took place after the Spanish Civil War. The core of this publication are the testimonies of the family members, including the 3rd and 4th generations, with a strong emphasis on gender perspectives and the transmission of intergenerational pain. Arancha has worked with the Colombian Truth Commission, focusing on Colombian migrant women in exile, has taken part in the Women's Tribunal of the Balkans, and keeps on working with migrant women in Spain and the Mediterranean, mostly from a psychosocial and a psycholegal perspective. We're thrilled to have Dr. Garcia Del Soto back with us, and I turn it over to her.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well? I hope so. Great. I'm so grateful to be here today, mostly because when I was here, I got to meet some of the most knowledgeable and kind people within academia and also activists and lots of humanitarians. So I feel like this opportunity is a gift to reconnect, despite the fact that I'm already in touch with a lot of the people that I met through the international diplomas here, the IIHAs, and some former students of the courses we held here at Fordham. Let me try to begin our time together this morning with this picture of Afghan young women in the port in Athens, okay? But basically, what I want to do is to remember, take this starting point by mentioning a meeting that took place on December last year. The people that called for the meeting were the Women Lawyers for Social Activism, that brings together lawyers from Palestine and from Israel as well. And these people have been working together for quite some time. And recently they've put together a project on the United Nations Resolution 1325, which is basically about the role of women after peace processes and during the so-called post-conflict times. These women contact us basically because they were very interested in previous experiences in other contexts in different countries of collecting the testimonies of women that had been impacted by war. Basically, what we did at this first meeting was sharing examples from these other countries. And these countries were the Balkans through the Women's Court, which was an initiative that took place back in 2015, and also the experiences of the Colombian women living overseas. We also have the opportunity of working currently with migrant women that arrived to the Southern Mediterranean countries, and we also talked about that. Basically, what's going on now is that starting in Rome, the Basso Foundation, through what is called the Permanent People's Tribunal. Hello, yeah. The Basso Foundation, Permanent People's Tribunal, is putting together a tribunal for migrant women. Only this week, we're going to have the second meeting. So let's just try to move forward. And my proposal for the next 40 minutes is the following: to share with you a brief description of the three following cases. First, the women in the Mediterranean countries, the women in the Balkans, and then Colombia. Of course, there are lots of similarities and diversities to these cases. And we need to keep in mind something very obvious. We are talking about different contexts, but it is true that we use common tools when working with the people, the women over there. Basically, what we do is we listen to them. We collect their testimonies and we are witnesses of somehow the trajectories that they start building up after they've experienced violence. In this regard, these initiatives are transitional because they belong to the so-called post-conflict times with all the question marks and all the nuances that we can think of, and they are also transnational. Lots of these women have been moving around, unfortunately, right? I would also like to mention very fast some of the initiatives that the younger generations are using in order to disseminate and advocate about the situation of women and other groups after conflict. I would love to hear from you also at the end about your ideas, your thoughts, and what you have in mind are the next steps, okay? Let me start reminding just something that's also very basic. This is Mama Meira. Mama Meira is very well known in Srebrenica. She lost a son and a daughter. The picture to your left is one that they took right after the massacre of Srebrenica in the Balkans, one of the largest massacres in Europe after the Second World War. And the picture to your right is a picture of the same person, Mama Meira, in the 20th anniversary of the massacre of Srebrenica. There's lots of pain, lots of trauma, but also lots of resiliency, okay? And meaning making after people go through these tragedies. Basically, when we work with women, there are some kind of gender commonalities that we get to find in different places. Let me share with you a few examples. The first of them is the example of women that are applying for asylum who have this tendency to talk first about other families under the argument that there was no fear of their own, precisely because they were describing the different types of violence that their family members experience, and they put themselves in the very last place. It has a lot to do with the role of women as caregivers. It is also true that many women tell us that they experience that the death rituals for women are also different than they are for men, in the sense that they are less visible out of the different social patterns that they experience. What we've also seen, going back as far as the Spanish Civil War, is that many women, when they fulfill their roles as caregivers, they end up somehow protecting the males in their families, and they are persecuted because of that. It's also very important to consider the realities of the second and third generations. And more increasingly, we get to see a lot of single mother families in these second and third generations. If you feel like it at the end, maybe we can also talk about some of the roles of these women that have become or were even before and during the violent times, human rights defenders. One of the phenomena that goes along with the visibility of women roles after conflict has a lot to do with the different LGBTIQ populations. And the Truth Commission in Colombia has been instrumental in this regard. We're going to be talking about it in a few minutes. Let me move forward by saying that, as I've already mentioned, our basic tool here is the collection of testimonies. Why do we do that? First of all, because sharing with these women from a more horizontal approach, many times from the grassroots, means spending time with them. And spending time with people means that we talk to each other. I don't want to sound too much like the Oscars, but women do talk, right? So do every single person. But there's this tendency for women to get together and start sharing things. This is what it's tried to be described here in the quote from Shenhaf, okay? Human beings are essentially storytelling creatures. Very basic, very obvious, but important to be remembered. Paul Farmer himself, in his book Haiti After the Earthquake, used to say that collecting testimonies was crucial and that he kept on learning so much throughout all his career. But he also acknowledged that collecting testimonies was not always valued within academic circles. And he called it the sort of the candor of testimonies collection. There's a fantastic, very recent book by Judith Herman in which she talks about truth and the sense of justice of different victims, you know, and she uses testimonies as well. Basically, what we do when we work with groups of women from different conflicts is to try to listen to them in the first place, considering this approach of what is called feminist justice that is usually detached from litigation. And we go from local to international, back to local, and we keep on moving towards all those different levels. Let me just share with you a few pictures here. Listening in smaller groups in Colombia a few years ago. This is a picture done by groups of people in the Sahara Desert that have been refugees for decades, long times, trying to portray somehow the importance of the exchange. And let me share with you how the interviewers feel nowadays in this project in which they are collecting the stories of different migrant women that are arriving to Italy, okay? In case you cannot read it, let me just try to summarize some of their opinions here. Interviewers, it is not so easy to initially reach out to these women. Yet, when it happens, these women intuitively understand that our engagement proposal is different, alien to the bureaucracy logic of the migrant welcoming system. As the interview unfolds the dialogue, migrant women grasp the authenticity of our listening, the free space of the mouth and the ear. a free space which only longs for creating new spaces of humanity among women. This listening each time is shaped by migrant women's views on the world, on their stories, on the profound reasons that have inspired their journey to Europe, in their quest for new opportunities and viable routes of dignity. Basically, they value this opportunity, the chance of sharing their stories that is connected also to the empowering realities that they go through, not always, but fortunately sometimes after they arrive to Italy in this case, okay? It is almost a mystery to us how this attitude of listening to women's stories unfolds itself into an evolutive opening of new perspectives, new circuits of binary relations. Not always do we have the same alchemy with all women, as it should be. But I must admit, said this one interviewer, that the lives of these women, each and every time, open their way into my personal life and experience, and they start to percolate inside my very life, well beyond the event of the interview. This is why we talk about collecting testimonies as a process. Let me start with the first case. Our first case here is precisely focused on the Mediterranean countries. The European Union, as of now, have this paradox of bringing together Frontex, which is kind of a new army trying to prevent migrants from making it to the borders of Europe, and other institutions like ODHIR that is very much focused on the human rights of migrants, okay? This is a drawing from one of the migrants from Syria that arrived in the coasts of Greece back in 2015. Those names that you see there, Cataneo, Klonowski, and Varaibar, are people that are very much focused on describing the realities of these migrant people in the media. Cataneo is a journalist, and he mentions these two forensic anthropologists, Klonowski and Varaibar. Varaibar is in charge of the ICRC, the International Commission of the Red Cross Forensic Mission. Basically, what's going on is that the Mediterranean Sea, unfortunately, is becoming increasingly a mass grave. And forensic anthropologists are very much interested in recovering some of the remains that are in the sea in order to give back the information to the families of these people. Here you have the link to this wonderful article that appeared in the New Yorker just a couple of months ago. Let me share with you some of the pictures by Enrich Kanak, an Albanian who lives in Greece, and he works for Magnum of the refugee camps in Greece. Greece started being a welcoming country only a few years ago, and out of the political changes and also the pressure of the European Union has somehow turned into not so welcoming and has this connection with Turkey now deviating many migrants over there. Forgive me for being so blunt and basic when providing with a description, because ultimately what we want to do is to focus on the realities of the women arriving to Greece now. Melissa is this co-op of migrant women that was set up by migrant women themselves that had arrived to Greece 20 and 30 years ago. I'm going to leave there for you a link describing Melissa in English. These are some of the pictures of this co-op. It welcomes women from all these different countries. As you can see there, Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, even before the current conflict, Iraq, Iran, Palestine, Morocco, Senegal, Congo, Nigeria. And it provides them with a schedule of different activities that is based on their needs. They want to learn German, first of all. They want to make it to Germany. Most of them didn't want to stay in Greece. Provides them also with activities that are connected to psychosocial well-being, cooking, pottery, arts, and well-being, lots of different meetings. I had the opportunity of spending some time with them during the last few summers, and you can see how they share all these different nationalities, women coming together, carrying along their cultural practices and learning from different cultural practices. Let me share with you briefly one of the initiatives that they had in their schedule. This was a photo voice activity. They were asked to share among them pictures that were revealing of something that they truly valued. And these were some of the things that they truly valued. After sharing the pictures, they started to put narrative in the pictures, describing those with words. And they were talking about the following. When focused around the indicator of well-being, they were talking about how important it was arriving to the co-op, Melissa, and feeling being taken care of, right? The feeling of trust as well. How they could talk about the things that they valued the most, like nature and relationships, and feeling understood, despite the fact that many of them couldn't speak the other person's language. There were interpreters there that were crucial. Of course, they played a crucial role, but they also talk about how important it was to communicate just with body language. When going to learnings, they were talking about the education, especially the importance they were giving to education in the second generations. The Institute has a very good publication on education in humanitarian settings. But also they were talking about the power of connecting people's lives through education with their future, and how they felt stronger when they knew that their kids were getting the best possible education. This is one of the pictures that one of the women from Syria shared in this photo voice exercise. And I don't know if you can see it, I hope that you can. But in the second screen to your left, there's these two women, and when we asked the women, why is this picture important for you? She was like, because in this second screen, I'm Skyping with my daughter, who is still back in Syria. She was in Aleppo at that point. Other people asked us if they could share not pictures, but things that they felt more connected to, like their own drawings or things that they were sewing or putting together. This is a drawing from a Palestinian second generation girl, Noor, that has been in Melissa many years, and now she's finishing high school there. This is another painting that they did on fabric following the photo voice exercise. And you can read somehow their basic thought and feeling. I'm human, not a refugee there. The education provided within Melissa and the support to the second generations was crucial, because just as I told you, most of them wanted to make it to Central Europe, but many of them ended up staying in Greece. And now a lot of these second generation women are somehow starting careers in Greece. A few of them are going to become medical doctors. Let me switch to another example from Italy now, okay? This is the story of Suhaila Saab. Suhaila Saab is an individual, wonderful woman who has been instrumental to us because she translated documents from Colombian women to Arabic so that those documents could be used by some of the migrants staying in Greece and Italy. Suhaila is a translator, but she's also an activist for migrant education. She's also a writer, and she recently published a book about a massacre that happened in her village of origin after she left. Another example of activism and how she's been connected, not only her group of origin in Syria, but also through her translation and interpretation, groups of women from other countries that are Arabic speaking and women from Colombia. Let's take the second jump now through our trip. We are moving to the Balkans now. This is the very well-known women's court in the Balkans. Why is it well-known? Because it was probably the most visible initiative of feminist justice that has been taking place in Europe recently. Took place in Sarajevo in 2015. These two women are mothers of Srebrenica. Here's another picture from the Women's Court that brought together people from academia, people from legal settings, and people with no formal diplomas that were very wise and had experienced the violent times in the Balkans themselves. The times connected to the war that took place between 1992 and 1995, okay? Here in the center, you can see Nora Cortiñas, a mother of the Plaza in Argentina. So there were lots of breaches also with other initiatives bringing together women. Do not forget that what happened in the Balkans was somehow the prompter in order to have sexual violence and rape considered as a weapon of war formally. These are some of the documents that the psychosocial working group with people like Marianne Lacry or Rebecca Horn put together in order to disseminate some of the realities that women experienced during the war in the Balkans. Lots of deaths, of course, the men, the warriors, are the majority of the people killed in the conflict. Generational differences that we got to experience while working in the refugee camps, and the mothers of massacres like Srebrenica, miming the examples of activisms of other women groups like the ones in Argentina. These mothers used to meet in Tuzla, a town close to Srebrenica, every single Thursday. And the messages they share were basically the messages that other family members of the missing, mostly women, shared all around the world. We do not forget, we are searching for our missing ones. Second generations were present there as well. Let me focus now on the very basic principles of the women's court that took place in Sarajevo. First of all, women were engaged in the preparations for this women's court for over 3 years. It was basically the group of women in black in Belgrade, Serbia, that initiated the whole exercise of testimonies collection, and they kept on meeting with different groups of women in order to prepare these testimonies to become visible during the 3 days that the women's court took place. Feminist justice that needs to be in place when there's no litigation and the state is not complying with its obligation regarding the so-called conflict, post-conflict time, The basic goal is to make women's truth visible. And in this case, it brought together women from 6 different states, the 6 different states that were the result of the conflict in this part of the world, in the Balkans. The basic motto here was listening with deep intention in order to remember, to be able to move forward in the best possible way, in a framework of good intentions, solidarity, and responsibility as well. The 5 crimes that people focused on after listening to all these testimonies throughout the years of the preparation were the following. First of all, the women wanted to make visible the war against civil population. And this includes everyone. First of all, the pain they experienced when they were separated from the men in their families, the disappearances, the torture, the families that were brought apart, but also the families fractures that happen as a consequence of the violence, the realities of mass displacement, the property losses, the massacres that took place. The second crime that the women's court focused around was precisely the use of women's bodies as battlefield. It was mostly talking about sexual violence. Women on stage describing their experiences, feeling protected because they had been prepared for that and they had follow-ups after they shared their testimonies. The third crimes were around militaristic violence. And you can read here, not only the realities of forced recruitment, but also what was linked to that. Basically the use of drugs and alcohol to promote this aggressiveness, okay? And also the impact that these all had among neighbors in the different rural and urban places. Number 4 was connected to the LGBTIQ, and we could experience intersectionality here, listening to some women that belong to the Roma minority communities. They were also part of lesbian groups, and they had been also experiencing sexual violence. And the last crime considered there, after grouping all the different testimonies throughout these years of preparation, was economic and social violence. The fact that many of these women were dismissed from their works, the fact that unions were punished, and being part of the unions that were there before the conflict and during the conflict was something that was considered in a very negative way, and overall the lack of protection of workers. All this happened and it kept on going in this context of post-war. And there were so many patterns of violence that were still present after the so-called peace agreement in the Balkans. There's still a lot of violence going on nowadays, in some cases connected to other migrant groups that need to make it through the countries in the Balkans in order to be able to arrive to different countries. Okay, basically what happened at the end of the Women's Court is that there was a global call to make visible this initiative so that it could be disseminated among other women's groups. This is what we've been doing since then. And this is why I'm sharing this with you once again. We've done it before and we will keep on doing this, okay? They also wanted to make visible the 5 crimes that we just mentioned and acknowledge the ultimate responsibility of the states, of the citizens that didn't want to be part of somehow, didn't want to take positions, okay? Calling neutrality or being non-political. Also the responsibility of different religious groups and the very important and ultimate responsibility of businesses, corporations, industries, you know. There was also a strong emphasis on the call for the need of economic and symbolic reparations and the need for education, which is ultimately what links us to the future generations, okay? We ended up with the use of the terms that are so closely related to transitional justice: truth, justice, reparation, non-repetition, in a framework of solidarity and sorority. Here are some pictures from Women in Black, which I already told you that was pretty much the organization that started the whole initiative for the Women's Court, who keep on experiences, even nowadays, threats and raids mostly by Serb radical groups. Some of the pictures of the events that were held during the event in Sarajevo, the international connections with the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, some of the singing events also during the Women's Court. And I would like to leave this here in order for us to move towards the very last case study so that we can have some time for us to exchange. The last stop of our trip this morning are the Colombian Women's Collective. Colombia is going through kind of a very unique moment. After many attempts to have peace agreements, the last one seems to be successful. It took place in 2018, and it set up what is called the Integral System for Justice, Truth, and Non-Repetition. Very long, complicated name, even in Spanish, okay? But this integral system has 3 basic pillars. The first one is the unity for the search of the missing people that should go on for the next 20 years. Well, it has already been going on for 3, but it can be prolonged, okay? The second pillar, it's called the special jurisdiction. It has a litigation mission there, and it's supposed to go on for the next 12 years, 15 in total, and it can be prolonged for 5 more years. The third pillar has already finished its mission. It was the Truth Commission, non-judicial, no litigation. It was supposed to collect testimonies from victims inside the country, and for the very first time, Colombian people living outside of the Colombian territory, mostly in exile. Before this very last peace agreement in Colombia, there were so many women's groups that had already been very active during the last, I would say, 30 years, putting together initiatives in order to protect the overall population by focusing on getting women together and shaping different initiatives that they were pushing for. Ruta Pacifica, the Pacific Route, is one of these examples. And here are some of their publications. First one in 2010, 2015, which is the way of giving back the testimonies that were collected 5 years before. And the last one that was very public coming from the Pacific Route was the one in 2017. All of them are translated to English. For the Truth Commission, we have the opportunity and the gift of listening to testimonies from the Colombian people in exile. And we had the opportunity of being very focused on women's groups. Here you can read some of the estimated figures for these Colombian people in exile, very different depending on the source, as we know. Lots of diversity among the women that were living out of Colombia, Afro-Colombian women, indigenous women, women that had PhDs, women that didn't have formal diplomas and had all the wisdom of their peasant background. This is one of the pictures of the meetings we held in Italy with some of the Colombian communities there. The basic mission of the Truth Commission was around, first of all, bearing witness. Then it was basically around holding meetings in order to be able to better define patterns and find collective cases, not only collecting the individual testimonies for each person, each woman in this case, but also some patterns of violence. For example, torture patterns or patterns or the impacts of violence in the life projects of these women. The final report released by the Colombian Truth Commission took place in July last year, 2022. Here you get to see some of the visible events, bringing together different profiles of people, Afro-Colombians in Canada in this case. But after the final report was released, there was a very specific volume on the Colombians in exile. And there was also a very nice partnership with the University of Notre Dame, the Kroc Center, which is, as of now and for the future, keeping the archive and the files with all the testimonies to be secure and also be a source for future research. So we encourage you to use it. There it is already. Apart from the work of the Colombian Truth Commission being focused in a very transversal way on genders, on indigenous realities, on the differences among generations. Of course, different women's groups were doing in parallel different things. These two are recent publications by what we call the buscadoras, the women searchers of their missing family members. There are a few men, but the reality is the majority of the family members of the missing are still women, as you know. Let me end up and wrap up the example from Colombia with an example from what is called Women's Collective, which is a large group of Colombian women in exile in different countries in Europe, but also in South and North America, okay? What they do, I ask them to share with me their basic principles, and this is what they shared. They told us, we are very much focused on advocacy. We need to make people aware of what's going on with our realities. The violence we experience back home and the violence we experience when we arrive to the new countries and we have to somehow begin new lives. All the transformation experiences we go through that are connected to resiliency and the things we learn when we get together. And of course, they always talk about basic feminist principles like sorority and the ethics of care when applied, when brought down to reality on a daily basis, okay? They talk about the matria. That's the term that they use to talk about Colombia, which is very much linked to motherhood and land, right? And they talk about how to engage in social issues with different community-based organizations that are focused on the social, cultural, and civil rights. It's fascinating to attend the meetings of La Colectiva de Mujeres because there's a lot of diversity. Peasants, women coming from urban backgrounds, for rural backgrounds, indigenous and Afro-Colombian, different generations, LGBTIQ groups. And of course, one of the very basic principles is that the private becomes very political. They do claim that they work around three main areas. The first one during the last 3 years was their contributions to this Colombian system, integral system, towards the transition of peace, the one that I described with the 3 pillars. The second main area they work on is connected to the preservation of memory through art and peace. And the third and last area of work has a lot to do with this need for advocacy and communicating their realities in different contexts. They finish saying what you can read there. Our space is healing and transformative. We wish to end all types of discrimination, gender, sexual identity and orientation, ethnic and class identity. Let me try to move now. Okay. And how are we doing on time? I think we're doing fine. What I like to do, if you let me to, is to share with you just a few basic traits of the commonalities among these three cases, trying to exemplarize women working together, right? In these cases, they are out of reach of litigation. And basically what they do is they work in a very horizontal way. I mean, nothing is completely horizontal, but it's much more grassroots than anything else. In some cases, they are linked to international organizations, but not necessarily. These processes are really collective processes, and they are very aware of the need to include diversity and to listen to all different voices. They integrate both private, personal, and the political. Do not forget that many of these women are human rights defenders. And this is one of the lines of research that we are working on right now. What are the very specific realities of these women that are human rights defenders? And they are assuming those roles in order to defend the collective rights of other women, okay? And I would like to wrap up by showing you a few examples of what's going on with the second generations. This is the pictures that we saw at the very beginning of the avant-gardes in the port of Piraeus in Athens. Also the picture that we've already seen of the second generations attending the meetings in Tuzla to call for the missing people after the Srebrenica massacre. There are comics putting together the realities of migrant women in Colombia, collective murals that are also very important in different places, both urban and rural. And if I was to try to summarize what I wanted to convey this morning, is that what we do through the collection of these testimonies is somehow also to try to support this move, the process toward collective actions that are searching for more social visibility, including all the diversity, and also by using some of the artistic pieces that the younger generations are very much engaged with, okay? There are not formal legal responses to many of the situations that these women are experiencing now in these, again, so-called post-conflict situations. But still, they keep on pushing for new regulations through this visibility and all the advocacy that they are doing. Always keeping in mind that there's a lot of diversity and there's still many painful experiences very much connected to isolation, loneliness, and invisibility. But through these collective processes and getting together, people, women in this case, have the opportunity of, first of all, sharing their experiences and getting that initial acknowledgement, and then in many cases, moving forward. That's how they share it with us, okay? Let me just try to wrap up, saying that we keep on trying to emphasize what we call the psycholegal aspects. We treasure these testimonies that we collect because eventually, at some point, they might be used towards different forms of justice. And we also try to focus on how to better measure the damage that these women have gone through, traumatic events, all different types of pain, in order to better formulate their reparations. They are very much engaged as of now in the formulation of reparation, and it's a great learning experience. Let me just put it in these very simple terms, to be able to accompany them through this wish to improve their lives, thinking also in terms of reparations that are not only material, but also symbolic, okay? To wrap up, I wanted to share with you this poem done by a Colombian second generation woman who is a single mom, and she has a missing father in her family. She's an artist, and she put together this sound map that I would like to share with you in order to try to finish with some music and not just words, okay? This is the translation of the sound map that follows. She made all the noises with her own body. Nothing here is done with instruments.
Somos como barcos, desvelada, mirando al techo. La verdad es que no sirve de nada que los sigan escondiendo. De todos modos, acabaremos por encontrarlos. Al final de la búsqueda están, eso es seguro. La pregunta entonces es, cuando los encontremos y nos demos cuenta de que nuestras vidas no han sido llenadas más que por la búsqueda de cuerpos, justicias y razones. Cuando veamos claro y de frente que la urgencia y la importancia de esta tarea se llevaron nuestros años todos. Cuando aparezca que estuvimos viviendo por ellos para devolverles la presencia y la dignidad a los que son nuestras raíces y para que nuestros hijos no atraviesen más por todo lo que hubo que atravesar en esta historia nuestra. Cuando los hayamos encontrado, pues, al final de la búsqueda, ¿en dónde quedaremos nosotros? Somos como barcos, con el rumbo determinado por las velas rasgadas que nos pusimos en la tarea de remendar en pleno viaje. Barcos que avanzan al ritmo del zumbido del viento colándose por los huecos de la tela y de la fuerza del hilo luchando contra el ventarrón. Sin remiendo no avanzamos, mas por andar remendando no vemos la ruta, ni alcanzamos a planear nuestro viaje por la urgencia de esa reparación indispensable. Entonces, cuando los encontremos allá, al final de la búsqueda, porque allá están, eso se sabe, no sirve de nada seguir escondiéndolos. Y entonces, al final, ¿dónde habrá quedado la vida realmente nuestra? ¿Será que la habremos vivido tan poco que acabarán sonriendo triunfantes los escondedores de los que para entonces habremos encontrado ya? Pienso en mi hijo y espero que en sus velas libres soplarán los vientos que él mismo escoja.
That's pretty much it. Please forgive me if I've gone too fast here. I think it's time to listen to your questions, your comments, your proposals. Thank you very much. I have a process to share, and I will be very happy to be in touch with you individually if we do not have the time to make all the comments or to go through all the answers. And if you want more music, we also have more music. Thank you very much for your time and your energy this morning. We are ready to listen to you now. Is that right, Brendan? Yeah?
That is right. Let's put our questions in the chat.
While you put your questions in the chat, okay, here, okay. Yeah, we had a few pre-submitted questions. This is what I had in mind. Thank you, Ryan. The first one says, as you can read there, okay, what has been the most crucial and impactful mental health and psychosocial support aspects that support a natural development of dealing with these experiences during the war, okay? For this first one, I think it's pretty obvious. When women get together, and each woman might have a very different individual rhythm in their process for trauma and recovery, they tend to feel acknowledged. And that in itself has a very important healing component. Not only that, but there's kind of a universal tendency in order to share lots of thoughts and hopes about the future generations. That's somehow the meaning making that impulses them into the future. And those are the main two aspects that we've been able to witness working with different contexts and with different ages of women with very different backgrounds. First of all, getting together and feeling acknowledged. It's in itself very, very important. It's the acknowledgement of my truth because you experience something similar, different at the same time, but still there are many commonalities there and things that make us trust each other. And the second one, that very common shared hope and the need for the future generations to go through much better times without violence. And that's somehow the very last part of the sound map that Sol shared with us and that we just played. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I hope this helps a little bit. The second question says, let me read it. Do women who have gone through significant trauma, even death, experience a sense of belonging to their mothers or parents? Well, my experience is that this is very personal. It's very much linked to the personal experience of the women, and it's very much linked to their way of processing the trauma. We've seen cases in which the linkages with their parents, that sense of belonging, as you mentioned it there, has been crucial for their resiliency and their recovery. And we've seen cases in which somehow the parents were part of the trauma, either because they played a role in the violence or because they were somehow associated to this. Not in a direct way, but they could have been associated in lots of different ways. So I guess I do not really have an answer for this, I'm sorry, but it is true that this is very, very personal. It reminds me of this book that I told you about, Truth and Repair, that was published recently, where there are quite a few very good examples talking about also the connections with the family reference, okay? Comments? Things that were not clear either because of my Spanglish or because I was just going in too fast? How important it is to have caretakers, husbands, families, or even perpetrators in the work? Thank you, Wilhelm. That's a great question. You see, it is very important. There's no way we can work with women if we do not consider the family members and the men. And the younger generations are becoming increasingly aware that the work on masculinities and building bridges and finding common spaces and times in order to build up together is essential. So there you go. There are some spaces in which there are perpetrators. The ones that I'm the most familiar with are the ones in Colombia because of the nature of the different violence there. And we've had groups of women working together that were both perpetrators, former guerrilla members, and victims of the same violent events. It's a great learning experience to witness the process of trust building, rage at the same time, pain. In some cases, there's not forgiveness. In other cases, there is. But there's one thing that is very common to these women, and it's also very much linked to the research. And it's the following. Most of these women are not looking for revenge. Most of them, and I could even expand it to survivors groups, men, LGTBI, are looking for protection and are looking for reparations in the sense of moving forward in the best possible way. But thank you for that question, Wilhelm. That's a key one. Which one, sorry? From Melissa. Melissa is here, okay. Hi, Melissa. The value of the initiative is so clear in terms of human dignity, peace and justice, reconciliation. Can you tell us more about your experiences, lessons learned in terms of integrating these best practices in policy development at other levels? It is embraced at state national, yeah. You know what? There's an ongoing wonderful example with the people in exile from Colombia and all the work that the women, the Colombian women's group in exile were doing to support the Truth Commission. In fact, there's a regulation that's moving forward. It's still on the making, of course, because as I mentioned, the Truth Commission released its findings only on July last year, but people know that it's on the making and everybody's very much looking forward to it. There are lots of internal lobbying groups and things happening there. So that's one of the positive things. In the Mediterranean countries, as I said, the Permanent People's Tribunal on Migrant Women is starting to move forward. It should be taking place in the next 1.5 years, I believe. I'm not really sure about that because it's mostly done by the group of people in Rome. I'm just witnessing and being part of the preparations. And we do hope that despite the lack of litigation measures and the clear legal connection, some regulations and clear recommendations will emerge out of that. But I am very aware, Melissa, that that's part of your work, and we thank you for your publications and your work on these connections. I think there's another one here from Wilhelm. In Colombia, we noticed how difficult it was to convince people at the outset that the groups we proposed could be trusted, and at the same time was the biggest success one achieved. Thank you for sharing that. You see, I've never had the experience of proposing groups. Well, never. I did sometimes, you know, I'm getting old, my memory fails. But most of the cases that I've experienced were connected to groups that were already ongoing. So in that sense is why we talk about accompaniment. And I can tell you amazing stories of the Colombian women in Asturias, my own region, and the meetings that we share and the activities that we do and how we get organized. Because when you accompany people that have been on the run for so long and have been putting together initiatives out of their own will, of course, that's different, you know. But I do understand that in most humanitarian settings, these groups must be nurtured and propose in a way, yeah. Michelle. Oh, hi, Michelle. So good to see you here. Michelle was one of our participants in the IDHA. It's great to see you. Yes, generosity. Yes, please, let's keep in touch. We've been in touch, let's keep in touch. I would love to hear more about the work that you're doing. Willem, now, what we notice here in Europe is that we keep underestimating the time it takes to heal wounds. Totally agree. We feel a real contrast between the many short-term projects and the generational transmission. And there is more attention for that now. But how can we do more? Wow, you see, that's the question. It's very difficult to work out of our organizations, right, Wilhelm? And we do our best. But I think that sometimes it's good to have the opportunity of coordination among different organizations, and even independence can sometimes be good, in the sense that in order to be able to accompany for a long time, you know, and to be there precisely in this very, very independent way. And it brings me back to one of the principles of humanitarianism, right? The definition of independence. Being there, precisely connected to the real needs, not being influenced by political, economic, or even organizational missions, I would say. It's difficult, but it can be done. It can be done. Personally, I feel very lucky because I've had and I still have the opportunity of doing this. You won't get rich. Economically, we know that it won't happen, but it's just wonderful. It's amazing from a knowledge perspective and from a human perspective. There's so much resiliency and dignity in it. And watching the second and third generations growing up and doing their own thing and the different interactions, What I'm going to share with you with the slides are some of the initiatives of these second generations. I hope you can see it now. Can you see my slide now? There are a few documentaries there from second generations in exile from Colombia. And there are songs as well, you know? Well, the songs are from first generations, but they are very popular among second generations. So yeah, but I totally understand what you're saying, William. Yeah, it takes so long to heal. And it's so worth it to witness and accompany those processes. I don't know if you want to wrap up with a song or we should just finish. How do you feel about that? Yeah? Should we play a song?
I think we can play a song, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Seriously, it's been great. I mean, I'm very happy to be here to reconnect with some of you. And seriously, if you want to follow up individually, I will be very happy to, first of all, learn from what you're doing and then share the many, many resources that we have from the past and from the current work. Yes, let me put my email in the chat. It was at the beginning of the slides, but here is my email. I'm very lucky to have my Fordham email. There you go. Can you see it? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I can see that Marco Canata is also there. So good to see you, Marco. Thank you, and Tasha as well. Yeah. Lots of friends that the IIHA has brought together and so many collaborations, I have to say. Yeah. Great impact. So I don't know what to do. Do we play the song or do we just wrap up? Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Keep in touch if you can, and all the best for your work.